Hi, fifth graders. We're here for our Fantasy Book Club lesson, session 13, where we are going to be interpreting allegories and metaphors. So, if you haven't noticed already, in fantasy novels, pretty much everything in fantasy has a deeper meaning. Because fantasy authors get to choose everything that's within their books because it's fantasy, then usually everything in the book has a deeper meaning. And oftentimes we see deeper meanings in two different ways. One way is we see the use of metaphors. So, a metaphor is when two things that are unlike are compared to make a point. Sometimes these things are not directly compared, but referred to. So an example there is her homework was an ogre waiting to devour her. Okay. We talked a few weeks ago about um, dragons being a metaphor for trouble and how people used to use those, map makers used to use those on maps to show that there was trouble or that there was some storm or something there, and that was a dragon. So the dragon was a metaphor for trouble. And so that's what a metaphor is. And you'll see a lot of those in your fantasy novels. Another way that fantasy authors put in a deeper meaning is by creating an allegory. Now, an allegory is a story or other artwork that seems to be about one thing, but is hiding a message, often a moral or a political one. We've talked a little bit about this already in terms of themes. So, um, before I had mentioned that fantasy novels, they're not really about castles and dragons and swords and villains and things like that. They're really about those life lessons or those, big messages that we can take and we can apply those to our own lives. And so those are called allegories. All right, so we're going to take a look at an example of both of those today. So our learning target today is we can interpret metaphors and allegories in fantasy stories and use those insights to better understand the real world. And so that's why these are really important. Um, and that's why they're in your fantasy novels, is because your fantasy novel authors want you to take those metaphors and those allegories and apply them to your own lives and to learn from them. So, this is an excerpt from a book called Mufaro's Beautiful Daughters. And in this part of this book, I felt like this was a good example of an allegory, meaning that the author wants us to learn something here. And it's not literally about what's going on in this, but it's more of a figurative meaning, more of a like a lesson or a message to be pulled out of this part. So I'm going to go ahead and read that to you, and I'll do some out loud thinking around what I think that allegory or that message is. I will give you some advice, Minyara. Soon after you pass the place where two paths cross, you will see a grove of trees. They will laugh at you. You must not laugh back in return. Later, you will meet a man with his head under his arm. You must be polite to him. How do you know my name? How dare you advise your future queen? Stand aside, you ugly old woman, Minyara scolded, and then rushed on her way without looking back. Just as the old woman had foretold, Minyara came to a grove of trees, and they did indeed seem to be laughing at her. I must be calm, Minyara thought. I will not be frightened. She looked up at the trees and laughed out loud. I laughed at you, trees, she shouted, and hurried on. So in this moment, um, it's kind of weird. I know we're not reading the whole story, but it's kind of weird that there's just this older woman who comes up to this character, Manyara, and gives her this advice. And, if you're not looking into it deeply, you might just think, oh, this is a weird moment. She gave her advice and she didn't listen. But really, if we're thinking, okay, if this has a deeper meaning to it, this seems like the author wants us to take away that we should take advice from people that are older than us and that might have more experience than us, which is exactly the case with that older woman and the advice that she was trying to give Manyara. And so that's kind of that allegory or that message within the story that the author's trying to get across. So that's an example of an allegory. My next example is about a metaphor. So here's a quote from Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince by J.K. Rowling. And this is a quote from a character named Luna, who I'll talk more about in just a second. I don't think you should be an Auror, Harry, said Luna unexpectedly. Everybody looked at her. The R's are part of the Rotfang conspiracy. I thought everyone knew that. They're working to bring down the Ministry of Magic from within using a mixture of dark magic and gum disease. Okay, so that's kind of a crazy quote. It's from one of the characters named Luna. And down below, I found somebody who kind of explained that Luna Lovegood, this character in Harry Potter, is actually a metaphor for something else. So I'll go ahead and read that description. Luna Lovegood is one of the most beloved characters in the Harry Potter series. However, she is also a metaphor for the moon. Luna literally means moon, and the moon is a mythological sign of madness. Luna has also been described as glowing and pale in many books. Luna is quiet, quirky, and some even call her mad because of the conspiracy theories she just subscribes to. So, Luna is kind of that character, and her name is a metaphor in itself for craziness or madness. And the things that she says and the things that she believes in are just kind of insane and kind of crazy. And like this person had pointed out, that Luna actually means moon, and so moon is a symbol for madness or for being kind of crazy. And so it makes sense that the author is using that name and that character as a metaphor for just kind of madness or craziness. So now what I'd like you to do is in your own fantasy books, be thinking about metaphors and allegories. So a reminder of what a metaphor and an allegory is on the right-hand side of my screen there. So you can take a look at those. But what I'd like you to do in your fantasy novels is to think of a metaphor your author uses and what it means. And so you're going to need to think deeply. This is going to be hard, and you might want to talk in your book clubs first before you write, some ideas down. But think of some metaphors in your book. So just objects, settings, people that might look like one thing or seem like one thing, but are actually have a deeper meaning to them. I'd like you to record your thinking in your reading journal and evidence to support it. Then you will consider, is my fantasy story a part in my fantasy story an allegory for a bigger meaning or message? So kind of going back to the idea of theme or life lesson or a message that we can take from your book. What is that? And, what is that bigger meaning in your story? It might be of your whole fantasy novel. It might just be of a part of your fantasy novel. Okay. So be thinking about those messages. Record your thinking in your reading journal with evidence to support it, and be ready to share in your book club meeting. Now, these are really tough concepts to think about, especially on your own. And so, don't be afraid to bring these up in your book club meeting and ask me or Miss Olson to help you, think about what a metaphor is in your book, or what would be an allegory, or is your book an allegory for a bigger meaning or a deeper meaning. Okay. But remember that in fantasy novels, almost everything is placed there for a reason, and there's almost always a deeper meaning to it. So pay close attention to those, take some notes down, and be ready to discuss this in your fantasy book clubs. All right, I'll see you guys there.
Fifth graders, we're going to do our next opinion writing lesson today, and you guys have done such a great job of writing your reviews that we are actually getting ready to wrap it up and publish. And so far we've done lessons on writing a good hook for your review, thinking about how to summarize the place or thing that you're reviewing. Then the most recent lesson, we worked on having convincing reasons and elaborating on those to really persuade your reader to go to the place or experience the item that you are wanting them to experience. So today we are going to be thinking about one of our last steps in the writing process, and that is editing and then into publishing. So if we look back at our writing process, we started out by brainstorming. You guys really took some time to think about what is a place that you really know a lot about and that you feel strongly about. That would be great for a review. You wrote your very first draft of that, and a lot of you actually did a really great job on your first draft because we had done so much thinking about opinion writing in the previous work we had done. We did some revising, going back and thinking about what our reasons are, and really making sure that they had strong evidence and that they that each element in it actually persuaded the reader to agree with your opinion. And now today we are working on the publishing or editing first and then into publishing. So that is our plan. And so the target today is really thinking about how you can make your writing easy to read for the person that is going to be reading it. And so that really goes along with editing and all the things that we do in terms of making our writing like have the words spelled right and complete sentences and those pieces. But there's a little bit more to it as well. And this is something actually in looking at our writing, I think that we can really be thinking about more and working on. So this table right here shows us some of the things that we can be thinking about as we get ready to publish our writing. And so thinking about spaces in between our words. Now I know this is a skill that you guys practiced in a lot of the younger grades in kindergarten and first grade. And I remember some of you who had used those space jewels, the little glass beads that go in between your words. But I do want you to actually take this one pretty seriously and go back and check your writing. Are there spaces between words? Just because we're writing on paper a little bit more than typing doesn't mean that we can just squeeze our words together to try and cram it all in rather than using a separate piece of paper. We do actually really want to make sure that the readers can read it, and part of that is making sure that you have a good spacing. And then the other pieces are going back through checking our spelling, and we have our strategies for that, which I'm going to review right now, and making sure our sentences start with capitals and have different types of punctuation. So I wanted to show you an example of writing that actually is really difficult to read. So this piece of writing looks very neat, but it definitely has some spaces in it or some places in it that could use some revision. So this person is reviewing a ice cream place called Absolute Zero. So this place might be called Absolute Zero, but it is actually the absolute best. It is not just the best ice cream in town, it is the best ice cream anywhere. So as I'm looking at this already right here, the absolute best, that I really had to like slow down and almost like move my face closer to it just so I could really figure out what they were trying to say. And the same thing down here, best ice cream. It all looks like one word and it was tricky for me to read that. One reason Absolute Zero is the best is because it is made with the freshest ingredients right in front of your eyes. They start out with just cream, then they pour it onto a cold burner. It is really a dry ice burner, and voila, it starts to freeze right in front of your eyes. So did you guys notice how, again, I really had to kind of like read closely to figure out what that meant? And if I'm honest, if I have to do that too many times, I'm probably not going to want to continue to read the writing. And you really want your audience to be able to read your review, and you want them to read the entire thing so that they're convinced to go there. And so making sure your writing is readable is an extremely important thing to do. So we're going to continue to look at this work look at this type of work for our own writing. So again, we looked at this checklist last time we did editing. So in addition to making sure our writing is neat and readable, has spaces in it, we want to think about all of these things, having punctuation, capitals, spelling. We don't want run-on sentences. We want to make sure our paragraphs are organized and that we use commas, that we use them for a very particular reason. So again, this is just a review. These are our strategies we've had all year long, and you can pause on this and go back and look at it if this is what's going to help you with your editing. But these are some of the strategies that we have. And again, I'm going to review quickly our spelling one and our two-finger strategy just so that we have those available to us. So I'm going to start off with the two-finger check, looking for complete sentences. So again, I take my two fingers, I put them at the very first word in the sentence, it starts with a capital, and then I put it at the period at the end of the sentence, and I read the stuff in between, and I see, okay, is that a complete sentence? Does it sound right? Does it have extra words? So I'm going to start with the Concrete Theater is a small one-room theater located in Concrete, Washington. That seems okay to me. It operates on Friday, Saturday, and Sundays. Okay. There are usually 2 showings each evening. Yeah, that's okay. I could probably explain a little bit more on that if I wanted to, but it's all right. Okay, and then they post the movies they will be playing on their Facebook page well in advance, so it is easy to plan for the shows you want to see. That was a lot of words in that one sentence, so I want to look at that a little bit closer. So they post the movies they will be playing on their Facebook page well in advance. It almost feels like I could put a period there if I wanted to. And then get rid of the end. So it is easy to plan for the shows you want to see. So really, I could probably take that one longer sentence and split it into 2 shorter ones. So that might be an idea of something that I do using my 2-finger strategy. The next piece you do, so I'm going to continue reading that whole entire paragraph using my 2-finger strategy, and then I'm going to move into spelling. And remember, this is kind of that silly strategy that we use, but it really helps us to double check words that we're not sure about. So I would be reading it backwards, 1 word at a time, and what that does is it helps us to read the word in isolation and not let our brain trick us into, oh yeah, it says what I want it to, because your brain knows what it wants to say. So as I read it backward, I would start with obstructions, without, screen, the, see, can, anyone, so, go, and that's how we're going to do it. So in this one, I might circle the word obstructions because that's just not a word I use very often, and I might want to check and make sure it's spelled right. So when you do find words that are tricky for you, one of the things that you could do is to break them up into syllables. And we've done that in our spelling packets all year. So when I'm thinking of a word like obstruction, I might think of how many syllables does it have. I can use the clapping trick. So obstruction, I know it's 3, and then I can think about what sounds go in each of those syllables. We're going to do it again as a practice using the word gigantic. So gigantic. So I have my 3-syllable swoops there. Gigantic. When I put it all together, gigantic. So that would be an example. Another one could be the word fantastic. So again, fantastic, 3 syllables. So I'm going to put my 3 swoops in there. And then I have fantastic. Put it all together. Fantastic. Okay, so that's just another spelling strategy you can use. I know you have a lot of other ones or places you could look it up, but I just wanted to give you guys another thing that you could try out. So today, as you're going through your writing, you want to do all of the editing on this checklist. You want to make sure, is it readable? And then once you have done all of that, you are going to publish your writing. Okay, so you have fresh line paper in there. Go ahead and write it out really neat. Make sure it has a great picture on it. Make sure it is a convincing review that you are really proud of, and then send a picture to your teacher. All right, look forward to reading those.
Hi, 5th graders. It's Mrs. McMillan here with your McMillan Minute, or 10. As a reminder, I would like you guys to have a focus body, maybe even have your computer set in a place that will be easy for you to learn and to follow along. You're also going to need to go ahead and grab your first math day packet. It looks like this. And also, you will also need a pencil. We're going to be talking about the array work, where our target is that we can use an array to multiply and divide. So go ahead, pause the video, make sure you grab this packet and a pencil and get ready to go. All right, 5th graders, I hope you were able to gather all of your things. I want to go ahead and go over our target today. Our target is I can use an array to multiply and divide. We have 4 steps we're going to use to do that today. First, we're going to be filling in the blanks of our array. Second, we're going to write a multiplication equation. Third, we're going to write a division equation. And fourth, we're going to solve. Remember, when you finish this array work, I would love for you to take a picture and go ahead and send that to us so that we can see your work and mark you down that you're getting that 10. All right, so Today I'm actually going to try a little different. I'm going to try using kind of a whiteboard to show you these steps. So hang on a second and I'm going to get that started for us. Hi, 5th grade. All right, here we are with my whiteboard. And as you can see, I've gone ahead and drawn out that question number 2. One difference you'll notice is I added in this 1/2 section over on the right side. I just drew a line straight down to kind of divide that up. That was the work we were working on last week that will help us to figure out these problems. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start. And you notice that there's a box kind of drawn right in here. And they just want you to fill in that box. What they do have, though, is they have it for the whole section. So we're going to go ahead and figure out one part, and then we're going to figure out that other part so that we can then go ahead and add the whole thing. That's the same for this bottom half. They kept that 2.5 together, and I went ahead and split those apart for our purposes. So I'm going to take those boxes off so we don't get confused. So let's go ahead and start here in this first box. And we know that if we just had that array, just like when we were in 3rd grade and we would build the tiles, we would have 3 tiles down and 2 across. So we would know that that would be a 3 times 2. And we all know, if I were in class, you would all say 6. And that is right. So we know that the first partial product we have for this problem is a 6. And I'm going to go over here to this second box where I have 3 times 1/2. And if I have 3 groups of 1/2, we also know that that means I have 1 and 1/2. And if I were to put both of those together, I would have 7 and 1/2. All I did was add those together. I put the whole numbers and then the fraction. So I know that that is also called a mixed number. Let's go ahead and keep going and see what we get for these bottom 2 arrays. This array would be 1/2, because my linear dimension is 1/2. My other linear dimension is 2. So I would have 1/2 times 2, which means I'd have 2 groups of 1/2, or 1/2 plus 1/2, which would be the same as 1. So I'm going to put that partial product over here. And then in this very final box here, I'm going to have 1/2. Hold on one moment there. Change that color. I would have 1/2 times 1/2. And we spent some time drawing out that array and what that array would look like. I'm going to do a quick model for those of you that want to see that again. So here would be my whole. I would have 1/2 of it. And I could shade that in. We'll shade it pink, I guess. Oops, got a little crazy there. And then erase that for you. There we go. And then on the other dimension, I would also have 1/2. So I'm going to cut that in half again. I only have half of that. I'm going to go ahead and color that a purple. And then we know where it repeats. This section here is our answer. So I have 1 out of 4 pieces. And that is going to be the answer for this bottom corner here. So I would have 1/4. And we know that 1 plus 1/4 gives me 1 and 1/4. Then I need to add this partial product and this partial product to get my total answer. So I could look at it as 3.5 oops, that's a 2 times 2.5. And now we're going to find out what the product is, or the answer to that equation. So if I have 7.5 plus 1/4, I know that I need to find an equivalent fraction for 1/2 and 1/4. And I know that if I multiply 2 times 2, I get 4. So 4 is a multiple. So I'm going to change 1/2 using a ratio table into 4ths. And I just said 2 times 4, 2 times 2 is 4, so 1 times 2 is 2. We know that 2/4 is the same as 1/2. So then I have 7 and 2/4 plus 1 and 1/4. So I have two mixed numbers I'm adding. I'm going to go ahead and add those whole numbers together first and get 8. And 2/4 plus 1/4 gives me 3/4. And so we know our total is 8 and 3/4. Now we need to think about, how could I divide this? What could I use to figure out a division equation? One way I could do that is I could find, well, what was the total inside my array? And you just told me that was 8 and 3/4. Great job, you guys. I knew you knew that. 8 and 3/4. And then I'm going to go ahead and divide that by one of our sides. And we knew that it was 2.5, so I'm going to go ahead and just put that. 8 and 3/4 divided by 2 and 1/2 is going to give me 3.5. I will find out what the other dimension is by using what I know already. So on some of these problems, it's going to be helpful for you to first figure out the division. And for some of them, it's going to help for you to do the multiplication. I want you to be sure to carefully go through each problem, making sure you filled in all of the shaded boxes, as well as have a multiplication and a division equation. You're probably going to end up with more math around it, just like I did. If you take a look here at the screen, right? Just like I did here. One way that might be helpful is if you color code it. That always is helpful to me, because then I know, did I get all of the pieces? If you have any questions, be sure to reach out to Mrs. Leibel or myself. And also, when you are finished, send us a picture. Thanks so much.